VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at VCYAmerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And welcome to Crosstalk here on the VCY America Network. My name is Jim Schneider. We thank you for joining us as we again are going to be focusing in on some happenings taking place in the Middle East. Israel clashing with Syria again over the weekend, and we're going to delve right into the issue as to what's going on, getting a first-hand perspective. It's our privilege to have back with us Avi Lipkin. He was born in New York and moved to Israel at the age of 19, serving in the Israeli Defense Forces and in the Artillery Reserves, and he served as an officer in the IDF spokesman's office from 1989 to 2001. Avi Lipkin has worked in the news department at the Israel Government Press Office. He has lectured in Christian churches and synagogues in many countries around the world, including here in the United States. He's written 5 books, such as Is Fanatic Islam a Global Threat?, Christian Revival for Israel's Survival, and others. His website, vicmord.com. And Avi, welcome back here to Crosstalk.
Great to be back, and if I may make one little correction, I've got 6 books out now.
Okay.
And the 6th book is called, Return to Mecca, and I explain how the Saudi kingdom is going to collapse as a result of Al-Qaeda, Arab Spring, fighting the king and killing his family, basically. Something has nothing to do with the West or Israel, but in the end, when they threaten the oil supplies to the West, the world will basically end up returning to Mecca, returning to Arabia, occupying it, and Israel will probably take a part of it as part of the One World Government plan to secure the Saudi oil. And I think, as you probably know today, oil has jumped up to like $105. So we're in a scary time now.
Well, it's been reported here that both yesterday and also this past Friday that Israel has launched some airstrikes against Syria. But we'd like to get your firsthand account as to what has transpired there.
Okay, well, firstly, the official line in Israel is not, admitting anything. Though it's like, Israel doesn't admit they're having nuclear weapons either. But, of course, foreign sources say such and such, and same regarding the attacks in Syria. So, again, I'm not an official spokesman for the government of Israel, so I suppose I can speak a little more, freely. Israel is facing a number of strategic enemies that we have to deal with. One, of course, is Iran. Iran is working on a nuclear project to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And, like North Korea, Iran is a kind of a crazy country, and they could use their missiles and their nuclear weapons to threaten other countries as well, especially in the Persian Gulf, countries like Saudi Arabia or Abu Dhabi or the Emirates or Kuwait or any country that Iran decides they're not happy with, not only Israel. Probably with North Korean help. There's a lot of cooperation between Iran and North Korea. So missile technology, nuclear warhead technology, is being freely passed from North Korea to Iran. So Iran is one strategic threat. Another strategic threat, which has been downgraded, is Syria, because, of course, Syria is very, very busy with its own civil war. As a Jew or you as a Christian, I think we're kind of sad that human beings are killing each other, but what we see is the true Islam, where Sunnis and Shiites are slaughtering each other. I mean, we are not happy to see any of God's creations destroying each other. But that is the essence of Islam. So Syria is much weaker today than it was 2-3 years ago before the Arab Spring. But the problem with Syria is that Syria, as an anarchy, it's becoming an anarchy now, it's being broken up into sub-countries. In other words, you have a Kurdish country to the northeast, you have the Shiite Alawite group to the northwest, you have the Druze in the south, and you have these different ethnic groups everywhere. The next problem, which is a big, big problem for us, is the one which is closest to us, and that's Hezbollah. And Hezbollah, as you know, rained thousands of missiles into Israel just a few years ago. and they have more than renewed what they had then. And the attack on Thursday night into Friday, was basically to denigrate and weaken the missile transports and the technology transports from Iran through Syria into Lebanon. And some of the things that the Hezbollah in Lebanon were getting were ground-to-sea missiles, which could basically sink any Israeli ship in the Mediterranean. They were getting missiles to attack aircraft. They're getting ground-to-ground missiles with accuracy, half a ton capacity, with accuracy that can hit Tel Aviv. So, we call these game-changer weaponries that Israel cannot tolerate being transferred into the hands of Hezbollah, which are also crazy terrorists.
Folks, we're talking with Avi Lipkin today. He is right in Israel as we speak. Avi, as you have talked about this weaponry and the crossing, the shipments taking place, is that speculation, or is there proof that indeed is taking place?
Well, I am not a Mossad agent or a Mossad employee, but, the Mossad works very hard in gathering intelligence information about these shipments, and, of course, other things, too. Let me tell you a little story, just to show you how things work here. I don't know if you remember, Jim, about 10 years ago, there was a massive train explosion in North Korea. And the train was in the middle of this town, and the town was completely burned to the crisp. A massive, massive train explosion. And immediately afterwards, in the Syrian newspapers, the obituaries were mourning the deaths of the top Syrian officers who were on that train. So, I'll give you a guess as to what was on the train. Now, people in North Korea are starving. So it could very probably be that there were people there in North Korea who were giving information to Israel, or it could have even been within the Syrian population. There were people giving information to Israel. Now, regarding what's going on in Syria today, you've got rebels, and, some of these rebels are not friends of Israel, but if they can give information to Israel, and then Israel goes and attacks the hated Alawite regime of Bashar al-Assad, then these Sunni rebels, are going to come to Israel and say, hey, we know about this, that, and the other thing. So, there's a civil war where every brother is fighting every brother there in Syria. And again, I personally love the Syrian people. I love the Arabs. I love the Muslims. I don't hate these people, but they got a crazy, insane criminal system in which Muslims slaughter Muslims. And I think it's satanic. So the Mossad looks for all kinds of different ways of gathering information, and the information reaches, of course, the Prime Minister's office, and then the decisions are taken.
Let me get your perspective on this, because I understand in some accounts that Egyptian and Jordanian intelligence sources said that yesterday's airstrike was coordinated with Turkey, which in turn coordinated these rebel attacks throughout Syria to further, foster that civil war that's taking place there. Not that they necessarily had advance notice, but that says when Israel does attack, then you go into motion. Any information on that?
Well, firstly, it's a given. Egypt is a Sunni Muslim country. Turkey is primarily Sunni Muslim country. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, primarily Sunni Muslim countries. And the war is a war between the Sunnis and the Shiites. The Shiites are basically what we call the Shiite Crescent, which is Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. And it's a war of survival. It's a civil war. It's kind of like, I don't know if you remember the history of the Catholic Protestant wars of Reformation. I mean, they were pretty bitter wars. But after 300 years, it was over. This war between the Shiites and the Sunnis has been going on for 1,400 years and will never end until one side is dead or both sides are dead.
So you're connecting dots from North Korea to Iran to Syria.
Yes, in other words, what you have basically is not only that. It's Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, all supporting Syria, and by extension, Lebanon, the Hezbollah in Lebanon. And each of these threats individually is a very extreme threat to the state of Israel.
Now, the United States has repeatedly spoke out in support of the Syrian rebels, but yet, the rebels aren't they part of the Al-Qaeda-linked jihadist groups?
Well, of course, in Syria there are many different groups fighting the regime. And what we see from the very beginning was you had democratic groups, socialist groups, groups that were, not necessarily al-Nusra, or the al-Qaeda. Then you had just simply officers who were not happy with slaughtering their fellow Syrian citizens who defected. But of course, you have the al-Qaeda people coming in. And, one thing that the American government, I think, is finally getting, in spite of the political correctness, is that, the United States was backing Osama bin Laden in the war against the Soviets in Afghanistan. When the war was over and the Soviets were defeated, you would think that the Mujahideen would say, oh, we love America for helping us. No, they said if we can defeat the Soviet atheist Satan, we can defeat the American Christian Satan. Mm-hmm. So the al-Qaeda are there joining what you'd call the other, I don't want to say democratic groups, but the other maybe more legitimate groups. It's kind of like also in Egypt with the Arab Spring, where you had people really, really out in the streets in Cairo wanting democracy, especially the Christian groups. But also there were Egyptian groups, Muslim people who were secular. And the thing was taken over by the Muslim Brotherhood. So in Syria, the fear is that the same jihadists, the same mujahideen, holy fighters will take over the revolution and turn it eventually against the West. And in Israel, we have, no doubts that the government that replaces Bashar al-Assad will not be a friend of Israel.
Yeah, it actually will open the door for al-Qaeda to take over.
Right, and this will be, of course, a threat to America too. So yeah. I think that the approach of the American government, the approach also of the Israeli government, is played on both the houses.
WND is reporting that they were told by a senior Syrian official that the Syrian government will soon declare that it's going to open its borders with Israel for the purpose of Palestinian and other jihad groups to carry out attacks against Israel. That sounds rather frightening.
Well, no, you know what, I'll tell you something. We had an experience about a year or two ago in which they did exactly that, and the Israelis, tried the crowd dispersal system, gas and, other things, tear gas. But when they broke through the defense line, a number of these people were shot, and then they were, either killed or wounded and taken back to hospitals in Syria. Israel is not going to tolerate such nonsense.
You're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America. We're speaking with Avi Lipkin today. He is right in Israel. Over the past few days, airstrikes carried out in Syria, and we are seeing just an escalation of activity take place there, and our guest today linking a connection with multiple countries: Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Syria, and Lebanon. And folks, things are heating up in that regard, and it's your thought, Avi, that Syria then is getting its weapons then through these other countries, the Russia, China, and North Korea, through Iran, coming right into Syria.
Very correct. And not only that, the Syrian economy, which is completely destroyed, is being artificially prepped up with money coming in from Iran and other places as well that support Bashar al-Assad.
We're going to take a quick 60-second break and come back with more discussion live to Israel as Israel clashes with Syria. But folks, could this be the making of another world war? Are we seeing nation after nation again rise up against Israel? We'll be back in 1 minute. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY America Network.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, who discovered dinosaurs first?
Chris, in the late 1600s, some giant bones were found that nobody could identify. They thought it might be a giant elephant. In the early 1800s, an amateur paleontologist found some bones which eventually became identified as belonging to a giant lizard. Fossil experts gave it the name dinosaur, which means terrible lizard. Most of them, of course, were vegetarian, but some of them appear to have been definitely meat eaters, and terrible indeed. Of course, I think they were discovered long ago, back before the flood. They were created on day 6 along with humans, and then most of them died in Noah's flood. That's the flood back in Genesis.
Thanks, Dr. Morris. For more on the relevance of creation, visit us on the web at www.icr.org. That's www.icr.org. For the Institute for Creation Research, I'm Chris O'Brien. Thanks for joining us.
You are listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America as we're taking you to Israel today to speak with Avi Lipkin, born in New York, but moved to Israel at the age of 19. He's been there for decades, serving in the Israeli Defense Forces for many, many years, and bringing us firsthand account of what's taking place there, even as we speak. And he is the author of numerous books. Avi, tell us more about your website and some of the resources that you have available to better inform people across this nation.
Okay, thank you. Well, my website is vicmord.com, half of Victor, V-I-C, half of Mordecai, M-O-R-D.com, vicmord.com. A lot of people know me from my pen name, Victor Mordecai, which was my first 3 books. And then my latter 3 books, the 4th, 5th, and 6th, were written under Dennis Avi Lipkin, a.k.a. Victor Mordecai. I also have 10 CDs, 10 DVDs. I also have Spanish. I also have DVDs. I have a book. My first book is in German also, so I'm trying to branch out into other languages. And very soon I'm going to have discs in Hebrew also, because I'm also running for office in Israel as the head of a Judeo-Christian political party that I'm forming. So I've got to prepare a whole thing now with CDs and DVDs and books in Hebrew and in Arabic and in Russian, because that is the voting constituency in Israel today. So it's vicmord, VICMORD.com. And by the way, also for people who want to just have an 800 telephone number for the books, it's 1-800-540-0828, 1-800-540-0828.
Again, folks, you can go to vicmord.com. Victor Mordecai was his pseudonym, VICMORD.com. You click on Bookstore, you'll find a link to his DVDs, his books, his CDs, online video, and just a number of resources there. vicmord.com or 1-800-540-0828. Lebanese media has been reporting that resistance forces are going to respond to this Israeli aggression. Do you think it's possible that there are going to be multiple countries all coming up from against Israel at different sides of the border at the same time?
Well, what we have seen over the last few years is the takeover, the domination of the Lebanese army by Hezbollah. So when you're talking about Lebanon going to war with Israel, very unfortunately, the Christians and the Sunnis and the Druze who live in Lebanon are dominated by this terrorist organization, Hezbollah, that doesn't have any second thoughts about, running Lebanon into the ground by starting a war with Israel. Similarly, and I think this is now the real question we have to watch, the leadership of Iran has said, our population in Iran is 70 million people. And if we go to war, and even if we lose half our population, in other words, if 35 million Iranians die, Allah still will have the victory. In other words, you're dealing with an insane leadership that does not mind wiping out its entire population for a war to destroy Israel or destroy the Sunnis in Saudi Arabia or to destroy America. And so this, of course, is something that will definitely concern Turkey and Egypt and Saudi and Jordan, countries in the Emirates, and of course Israel and the United States. I mean, you're dealing with an insane country, and I'll just throw out a real quick curveball here. I have a 3-year jail sentence in Switzerland, which has been commuted to a $1,000 fine, which was paid by the Christian EDU party when I was there in 2009, for saying that Allah is Satan, and Islam is not a religion at all. Islam is a criminal psychosis. And what you're looking at is criminal psychosis. You're looking at a regime in Iran that does not mind sacrificing half its population. It's kind of like kamikazes in Japan in World War II. Obviously, General MacArthur didn't go in to wipe out the Japanese. He went out to terminate the Tojo fascist system. In 1945, the Allies wiped out Nazism. Today, the German people have a life. Praise God. Germans are good people. Nazism made them crazy for a few years. So today, we're looking at a country like Iran. Israel was allied with Iran. The U.S. was allied with Iran until 1979. Iranians are good people. The Ayatollahs are crazy. The Ayatollahs there in Hezbollah, they're crazy. Bashar al-Assad represents a minority group that is killing everybody else. So he's crazy too. But the problem is when the majority group wins, they will destroy the Shiites. So there is no such thing like in America where Democrats relinquish power to the Republicans and there's a massive killing in the streets, or vice versa. That's the great thing about America, that, you know, we have, or in Israel, where we have elections and whoever loses, loses, and whoever wins, wins, and that's it. Nobody gets killed. But in the Middle East, there's no democracy. So when someone takes power, he kills everybody else. That is the essence of Islam.
Do you believe that the United States is it seems to me that they're pushing quite hard to bring in some very rebellious regimes in the Middle East region?
Well, you're talking about the Arab Spring.
It seems to continue on. I mean, whether it be Egypt or here we are, I mean, supporting the rebels in Syria, and at the same time, the links, you know, the ones we support are the very ones that are going to turn their weaponry either on Israel or on U.S. interest. That seems to be rather concerning.
It is indeed very concerning, and I would like to take a few minutes to say a number of things which I don't know. I'm sure I've mentioned them with Vic in the past, but I'll mention them again now. As you can tell, I'm an American, and I've been in Israel 44 years. My wife is Jewish, like I'm Jewish, but she was born and raised in Cairo, Egypt. And she has been working for the Israeli Call Israel radio services for the last 30 years in Arabic, and she monitors their broadcasts in Arabic because she knows the language. And they were saying 30 years ago, even if it takes us 150 years, we're going to make America a Muslim country. And my wife said, these people are crazy. How can they make America a Muslim country in 150 years? America is the greatest, praise God, the greatest Christian country on earth. Now, my wife is listening to their broadcast 30 years later, and they're saying, we thought it was going to take 150 years to make America Muslim. America's a piece of cake. We're going to do it in 30 years. In other words, America now is well on the way to becoming a Muslim country. And, you know, I don't have to tell you, Jim, you know that Christianity is being suppressed in America.
Absolutely.
And I think we could do about 10 hours of show on that now.
Yeah.
Christianity is being suppressed, and Islam is on the ascendancy in the United States of America. My wife picked up broadcasts in Arabic in 2006 that the Saudis were saying, we will have a Muslim president in the White House in 2008. And again, my wife said these people are crazy. How can you get a Muslim president in the White House in 2008? And this was in 2006 when nobody knew who Obama was. And then, of course, there's a YouTube, which I recommend to all your listeners to go to, which is called Saudi Plant, P-L-A-N-T, Plant. Like Manchurian Candidate. Saudi Plant was done by a Southern Baptist pastor, Carl Gallups in Florida. 5 million hits already. And it's about me and my wife. And my wife picked up a broadcast where Obama swore, when he was in Cairo in 2009, he swore to the Egyptian foreign minister that he's a Muslim, his father's a Muslim, stepfather's a Muslim. He was raised in a mosque and a madrasa till age 11 as a Muslim. And he swore he would destroy Israel when the time came. So you have a president of the United States who has 3 commands from the Saudi king. Number 1, destroy the Shiites, which is, you know, he is passively doing it, but, you know, by allowing Israel, Turkey, and other countries to deal with Syria. But the war with Iran is inevitable. I don't know if it's going to be today, tomorrow, a month, or a year from now, or whenever, but the nuclear project in Iran has to be terminated. Obama said in his book he would never go to war against another Muslim country. He doesn't have to. He has proxies. Israel is a proxy. Turkey is a proxy. All these countries are proxies. And the second thing after destroying the Shiite regime in Iran is to destroy Israel. The third thing is to make America a Muslim country. And, you know, I left America in 1968. 1970, you had 100,000 Muslims in America and 6 million Jews. Today, you have 6 million Jews in America and 20 million Muslims. because you got 9 million Iranians, you got 7 million Arab Sunnis, and you got 4 million Farrakans, nations. That's 20 million, and there are more. And they are brought in through all kinds of means. They're brought in through student visas in the universities. They bribe the universities with money. Then there was this completely uncontrollable tsunami of Islamic students coming into the United States. They're coming in illegally across the Mexican and Canadian borders. They're coming in by jet aircraft at the courtesy of the American taxpayers. And, people are not talking anymore about 11 million Mexicans, illegals. They're talking now about 57 million. And I have an email I can send to anyone who writes to me, vicmord2001@yahoo.com. I'll send it to them.
Just wait one second, Vic. You said Vic Moore.
They will all vote Democratic. It's the end of Christianity. It's the end of the Republican Party or any conservative Christian values organization. So this is all very concerning. And I want to make one last point, which actually now I'm going to answer your question. You got a country like Egypt. They have the Arab Spring. The Muslim Brotherhood takes over. The U.S. government supports the Muslim Brotherhood. What is the purpose of the Muslim Brotherhood? To spread Islam. And if you have 10 million Coptic Christians in Egypt, now they're being offered one of three possibilities. Either you convert to Islam, or you die, or you flee. And so a lot of Christians are going to flee. Some are going to die. But basically what it means is it's the end of Christianity in Egypt. And when you get rid of the Christians in Egypt, you get rid of the economy, because the backbone of the Egyptian economy is the Christian Coptics. When you get rid of the economy, what happens? The people starve because the economy collapses. When the people starve, they leave. Where do they go? They go to the country where the president is a Muslim of a Christian country. That's Obama. That's the U.S. You've heard of Agenda 21, right?
Absolutely.
Agenda 21 means the U.S. government can confiscate national parks, national forests, resources, big farms. There's the King Ranch in Texas is the size of Rhode Island. You could confiscate that ranch and put in 5 million Muslims there. I mean, I drive all the time through Texas and Oklahoma. The whole place is full of beautiful forests and mountains and lakes, and there are very few people living there. I don't have to tell you. America is empty. Canada is empty. Brazil is empty. Mexico has room. Europe has room. And so you're going to have tens of millions of Muslims abandoning the Middle East, which is being turned into complete desolation by these civil wars. And the ultimate goal is to have a Muslim majority in America. Obama said in one of his speeches that America is the greatest Muslim country on earth.
Avi,
he's a prophet because that's what his purpose is.
Avi, you mentioned very, very fast, and I want you to go back and repeat that email address you said people could contact. We said vicmore2001?
Yeah, it's kind of like the website. The website is vicmore.com, and you can also find my email write to me through the website as comments.
Okay.
But the personal email is vicmord, VICMORD, 2001@yahoo.com.
Okay. And now you are asserting, as you've talked about this influx, you've asserted that you believe that Obama is going to bring in an influx of 50 million Muslims by the year 2016. Are you being a little extreme there?
Well, the actual number of total immigrants is 57 million. So if you deduct 11 or 12 million Mexicans and Latin Americans, you're still talking about 47, 46 million Muslims. I mean, it's not just Muslims, it's other groups too. But you already have 20 to 30 million Muslims in America, because I quote 20 million, but there are a lot more which are under the radar that nobody knows about. And the Muslims don't want to publicize it for obvious strategic reasons. The Jews don't want to admit that they're not number two anymore. America is not a Judeo-Christian country anymore. And Obama said it in his first inaugural address. He said, America today is a Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu country. Wow. So, this is the plan is, if America was the great Christian Satan, there are two ways to destroy America. Either crashing planes into the World Trade Center, which is Al-Qaeda, or the so-called peaceful Muslims, the quiet, moderate Muslims. We've
got to take a break, and we're speaking with Avi Lipkin here today on Crosstalk. Let's open our lines, 800-733-9829, 800-733-9829. We'll be right back.
The New England Primer was introduced in Boston in 1690 by Benjamin Harris. It was the first textbook printed in America. For a century after its introduction, it was the beginning textbook for students, and until well into the 20th century, it continued to be a principal text in all types of American schools. The founders, as well as millions of other Americans, learned to read from the New England Primer and the Bible. The core of the primer is its rhyming alphabet, such as for letter A, in Adam's fall we sinned all. It also included lessons for youth, Bible questions, and a shorter catechism. To obtain a pocket-sized hardcover edition of this 1770 historical reprint, send a donation of $8 or more to VCY America, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin 53208. Simply ask for the New England Primer. To make your donation by phone, call 1-800-729-9829. That's 1-800-729-9829.
This is Crosstalk on the VCY American Network. Our guest today on Crosstalk is Avi Lipkin. Perhaps you know him by his pseudonym Victor Mordecai. His website, vicmord.com, VICMORD.com. He's got a number of books and resources there, including Is Phonetic Islam a Global Threat? His latest book, Return to Mecca. You'll find that there under their resource section. You can also contact them for obtaining these materials at 1-800-540-0828, but you can check out the site there as well. We're talking about some of the goings-on here from the past weekend, but it's not limited to just the last few days, folks. This has been brewing. It's been going on. We have the Syrian rebels that are fighting against the Syrian government. We have weaponry and arms going into Syria, and Israel seeking to put a stop to this because those arms are going to be turned against Israel as well. And some alarming things that are going on as we're seeing the takedown, the overthrow of governments in the Arab Spring, but what rises up is even more hostile than ever. Avi, just before we go to the lines, and I see the lines are all packed here, do you have concerns? I mean, some of these nations have been friendly toward Israel, at least non-hostile, in the past. Egypt for many years had a good relationship. Jordan's had a good relationship with Israel. But we're seeing with regime changes take place that the intensity against Israel is becoming more and more severe.
Well, yes and no. In other words, of course, the fanatic Sunnis are no friends of Israel, but on the other hand, the fanatic Sunnis are very, very much against the fanatic Shiites. Mm-hmm. And an interesting point I wanted to share today, in the Persian Gulf, there was a maneuvers held by 32 nations, including the U.S. and Britain and other countries there with the Arab countries, dealing with ships sinking or mines released by the Iranians in the Persian Gulf to stop the oil flow. I mean, all kinds of preparedness-type drills were carried out. They weren't military drills against Iran. They were preparedness drills. And I didn't catch the guy's name or what country he was from, but there was an Arab leader, an Arab sheikh, who got up there and said, Israel is the only country that can do anything about it or will do anything about it, and everybody else is chicken. So, I mean, it's interesting that a Sunni would say that, but you have to understand the war with Israel is 65 years old. The war with Shia is 1,400 years. And the first stage in the Saudi plan is to terminate the Shiite threat. After that is Israel. After that is make America Muslim.
Our lines are packed. Let's begin in Des Moines, Iowa. Andy, thanks for calling. You're on the air.
Yes, thank you for the program today. And, what Mr. Lipkin said, that we're not a Judeo-Christian country anymore, it's obvious now, but it's been taken over through the government and the courts by saying that man is in charge of what's right and wrong instead of God. God is in charge of what's right and wrong.
Avi, you have said that you believe Christians in America are asleep.
I always say Christians are asleep and the Jews are comatose. Listen, they took prayer out of schools in the 1960s. 1973, I think, was Roe versus Wade. Yeah. Little by little, they're chipping away at the Christian foundations of America. And as a Jew, I am saying what made America great was Jesus Christ. You've got to have a Christian country, or the country is going to be destroyed. And there is no other country in my book that can replace America. It has to be a Christian America, and America has to be preeminent in the world. So this gentleman is 100% right.
Thank you, Andy, for your call. Let's go next to Washington State. Barbara, you're on the air.
Okay, I have a two-part question. We know that somebody in the Obama group is trying to do away with term limits so he can run again. And then we also have the gun control and the government purchasing ammunition. And I know before this last election there was some hype about him attacking Iran so he could declare martial law. Now what I'm wondering is, do you think that by 2016 Mr. Obama is planning on becoming the dictator of our country?
You know what? That's a very tough question to answer. If I'm going according to what the information that I have, I understand the information that you have, and the people that I speak to in America are the same type of people like you who have that kind of information about the dictatorship and the FBI and the CIA turning against Christians, and this is possible. But, you know, I think that what we are seeing, like I said before, is a plan by the Saudis, by the Qataris, by the Islamic world to bring into the U.S. tens of millions of Muslims with a lot of money. And, you know, Wall Street just hit 15,000, and I think Wall Street will continue to rise because it is being propped up by Saudi money. And there are a lot of people in America. You've got a lot of minorities who are very happy with Obama. And if you get 50 million more minority people in the U.S., the Christians are increasingly being outnumbered, and the people who represent the other ideologies, especially Islam, will be dominant. And there might not be need for FBI or CIA or anything because the country is lost. So it's very important for the churches to wake up, have a Christian revival, and put a stop to it now.
Thank you, Barbara, for your call. And folks, I want to remind you, last week on Crosstalk, the program we did on the amnesty legislation that's working its way through Congress right now, and the Center for Immigration Studies, go back to our website, crosstalkamerica.com. Listen to that, and you'll certainly see this pathway to a quote-unquote pathway to citizenship is going to bring some baggage with it that this country may one day regret. Let's go to Raleigh, North Carolina. Jerry, you're on the air.
Yes, Avi, I actually know you and you know me. This is Jerry. I've heard you speak before about something that sounds almost too impossible to believe, and I want you to comment on it. In Edmonton, Canada, there supposedly is an entire city that's 100% Muslim that was just dumped in there with Middle Eastern money, Muslim money, and you never hear anybody talk about it. And also on the North Carolina-South Carolina border, there's supposed to be a Mecca there that's very quiet. You never hear anything about. There's supposed to be a ton more put in, all brand-new housing, like overnight, just boom, influx of Muslims. Is this true, and approximately what do those numbers look like, the population numbers in both Canada and here in the U.S.?
Okay, well, firstly, I hate to disappoint you about numbers because I don't have numbers, but what I'm talking about are trends. The trends are that you have a lot of empty space in the U.S. and Canada. The story of Edmonton, which is something being repeated in the U.S. as well, is that you have real estate, which is not really worth anything. It's empty land. It's forest. There's nothing there. And what they do is the Muslims buy this land. They pave a road, a curving road, the serpentine road from the outside to the inside, put up a magnificent mosque right in the middle. This is before anyone has even moved there to live. After they build the mosque, they knock down the next circle of trees, and they put up the schools and the stores and the institutions. Then, again, nobody's living there, but they're building it. And then after that, they put up the housing, and then they bring in, say, 50,000 people in one shot in that forest. And I heard about this in Virginia. I heard about this in New York. Like you said, I don't know if it's North or South Carolina. It's on the border between North and South Carolina. I heard about this in Texas. There are areas, I don't have to tell you. You know, I go a lot through the Ozarks. I go through Mississippi, Missouri, and and Arkansas. There is a lot of beautiful, pristine country which is completely empty. If you want to bring to the United States 50 million immigrants, you cannot bring them into the cities. You cannot overburden the infrastructure of the cities. The cities cannot cope with that. So you build completely new infrastructures in forests, in places where you can plan this. This is being planned. And Agenda 21, my interpretation of Agenda 21 is confiscation of American land, American property, Canadian land, Canadian property, in order to bring in tens of millions of starving refugees who are in the middle of the deserts of the Middle East. The Arab Spring, the Islamic approach of killing the Christians. I mean, they got rid of the Jews already, for heaven's sakes. The next group to be destroyed are the Sunday people, not the Saturday people. Yeah. After they get rid of the Christians, the economies collapse, and then you have tens of millions of starving Muslims, and the plan will be to transfer them to where it's greener on the other side, which is the U.S., Canada, Brazil, Mexico, Europe. And these countries, you already have 20, 30% Muslims in many of these European countries already.
Jerry, if you do an internet search, even I put in the words Edmonton, Canada, Islam, because you mentioned Edmonton, Canada. They are boasting to have Edmonton Islamic Academy, which they say is the largest Islamic school in North America. And certainly something's going on there. Appreciate your call there, Jerry. Let's go next to Green Bay, Wisconsin. John, you're on the air. Hello, John. John, you got to turn the radio down, please. All the way off.
Jerry. Let's go next to...
Okay, we can't do that. Let's go to Gene in Michigan. Go ahead, Gene, you're on the air.
Yeah, I want to just mention that. Is that true that Obama is a Muslim communist? And I have to further talk about it. And he was backed by Bill Ayers, the big multi-billionaire communist from Chicago, and also George Soros, another multi-billionaire communist. And then the USA Communist Party, did they back him on the second part of his election?
The information I have is yes to everything you're saying.
Wow.
By the way, there is a man from New Zealand who I met in Oklahoma City where I was speaking, and he was speaking too. His name was Trevor Luden, and he has written a 700-page book documenting all of the communist background of Obama. Wow. All his teachers were communists. All his teachers were subservient to the communist agenda. And yes, his father and his grandfather in Kenya, they were Muslims, but they were communists.
Wow. And
they were anti-colonialists. And that's one of the reasons why Obama returned the bust of Winston Churchill to England. He didn't like Churchill. For me, Churchill was my role model in life. And so, you have a president who has this unholy matrimony of communism and Islam in his life. And the answer is absolutely yes.
Wow. Thank you, Avi, and have a good day. God bless.
Bless you.
Thank you, Gene. Now let's try John back in Green Bay. John, go ahead. You're on the air.
Yeah, sorry about that. I had my radio on. I'm Muslim. I immigrated here about 37 years ago, and my first reaction to your guest was that he's a psychopathic, racist lunatic. But I figure that pull back, and I'm trying to understand where his vitriol is coming from. And I get it. The Holocaust happened. Israel is a very important factor in his life, and now you have this threat from Iran, and I get it. That, there's some foreign insecurity in Israel regarding Iran, but to say every third or fourth word that Islam is bad and Muslims are evil and they're trying to take, really, seriously, do you seriously believe that the majority of Muslims are bad and evil? Do you really, really believe that?
Avi?
I would like to know.
Okay, well, firstly, I want you to know I love the Muslims as human beings. I married my wife. By the way, she's Jewish, but Arabic is her mother tongue. She came from Egypt, and I was looking for a wife who spoke Arabic and was Egyptian. I love the Arabic culture, and I used to be very close to many, many Muslims until I found out what the purpose of Islam is. Now, Muslims say that they believe in Jesus Christ. The problem is Jesus Christ, according to Islam, is a Muslim, and he's going to come back a second time to kill the Jews on Saturday and kill the Christians on Sunday. If you think Islam is good, then what you're saying basically is that Jesus Christ is a Muslim coming back to kill Jews and Christians. There's a teaching in the Hadith that I think it's in Bukhari. It says that on the Day of Judgment, the Muslims will kill every last Jew on the face of the earth, and there will be Jews who hide behind rocks and trees, and on that day, Allah will give mouths to the rocks and trees, and they will call out to Abdullah, servant of Allah, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him. So basically, Islam is a Holocaust system bent on finishing the work that Hitler started. So I don't think Islam is a nice thing. I think Muslims are great people, but most Muslims are secular. Most Muslims don't really care about all this stuff. And the ones...
Tell you what, we've got to take a break here. We'll be back in 60 seconds. John, hang on the line. We'll be right back.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewweekend.com. We're continuing our series on a biblical worldview and money, 20 points, and we're on point number 10 today, which is, it is God's grace that allows us to obtain wealth. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 17 and verse 28 speaks to this. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7 speaks to this. It is by God's grace that we even have the ability to earn a living. Whatever skills you have, it's by God's grace that you have them. Every good and perfect gift comes from the Father above. If you have the ability to work with numbers as an accountant, that's by God's grace. If you have the ability to get up every day and physically go do a job, that's by God's grace. The ability to even take another breath is by God's grace. So we need to understand that it's by God's grace that we're even allowed to obtain wealth. For more information on having a biblical worldview when it comes to money, you'll find some great articles on our website at worldviewweekend.com, worldviewweekend.com.
You're listening to Crosstalk here on the VCY America Network. Avi Lipkin is our guest today. He's talking to us right from Israel. We have John, who is calling from Green Bay, whose first thought was that Avi is a psychopathic, racist lunatic. And John, Avi was responding to you. Did you want to ask him another question here or challenge him?
Yeah, sure, Avi. I mean, it appears that you probably know a little bit more about Islam than I do. I can tell you that I'm an educated Muslim. I've never been taught by my parents to do any of the things that you've just said. But, so be it. You might have drilled into some specifics you found that were offensive, and if they are there, I would agree with you. They're offensive. I have a few Orthodox Jewish friends, and they've talked to me about the things that you can find in the Talmud that aren't exactly nice about non-Jews either. But I'm not trying to nitpick here. I'm just trying to say that I think that you're being slightly irresponsible. Please recognize that when you spread hate, it takes seed in people's hearts who do truly have a reason and want to hate. Please, for God's sakes, learn and apply what happened in the Holocaust, and don't turn this into a hatred situation. Don't do it.
John, let me ask you this: when we have the Quran that says to kill the infidel, what is that referring to?
Sir, I get what you're saying. It's in there, but do you ask me if I believe in it? I don't.
Well,
and that's the part that you have to understand. There's many things in the Bible
but is that
you're not supposed to eat pork. If you read the Bible, you're not supposed to eat pork. Why do you eat pork?
No, you're changing the subject right now, John. Do you? That is a teaching, though, of Islam, but you're saying you deny that teaching of Islam.
I don't believe in that, and
okay,
that's the bottom line. And if it's there, I haven't read it in that context. If it's there, please tell me which paragraph, which chapter it is. I'll go look at it, and maybe I can come back later on and discuss it with you and see what it's all about. Yeah. Can you tell me which chapter it is, what paragraph it is?
I believe that might be around Surah 539, but certainly if you look at, and we've interviewed one by the name of Usama Dakdak, he has prepared a first true English translation, word for word, of the Quran, and his website is thestraightway.org, thestraightway.org. I think you'll find that very beneficial. Thank you for your call. Avi, do you have any further comment here before we go to their next call?
I have one little comment, which may sound strange. My son, Aaron, who works with me, has a company for Christian tourism to Israel, but we bring Jews. And you want to hear something? We brought a Muslim to Israel, Pakistani, and it was a fantastic tour. And we don't hate the Muslims. We love the Muslims. And we just like, I used to hate Germans. I said all Germans are bad. And then I realized Germans are great people, but Nazism did a number on the German people until 1945. And then, praise God, when the Allies occupied Germany, the Germans got a life back. And what I'm saying is, this guy called, I love him, he's a great guy. If he says he doesn't believe in any of this stuff, you know what the true Muslims call him? They'll call him a kafir. Kafir means he's an infidel. And he will be killed before the Jew and the Christian for betraying Allah.
Let's go to our next call. We have Rick calling from Navarre, Florida. Rick, you're on the air.
Yes, good afternoon, gentlemen. In January, Prime Minister Netanyahu attended the ceremony opening or marking the completion of the border fence between Israel and Egypt. And at that time, it was announced that illegal immigration from Egypt had been reduced to virtually nil as a result of the fence, although a portion still needed to be completed around Eilat. I'd like to ask Mr. Lifkin, is it still the case that illegal immigration into Israel has been reduced to virtually nil as a result of the completion of the fence with Egypt? And has there been any attempt by Israel's Arab neighbors to increase infiltration as a result of the war in Syria and the takeover of Egypt by the Muslim Brotherhood and other pressures? In other words, is Israel still able to prevent illegal immigration using its fencing system?
The answer is absolutely yes, very correct. The Egyptian government, the Jordanian government, I mean, they're still, I don't want to call them allies, but they're still, we have a friendly relationship with them. We work with them. But one thing very important that nobody really talks about in the media that I wanted to mention is that a lot of these hapless refugees coming in from Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Sudan, they come into the Sinai, which is Egypt. They're brought in by traffickers, and then they're basically held hostage by the traffickers, and they call their families back home where they came from and said, if you don't give us such and such money, we will start removing their kidneys and their body parts and their organs and kill them and torture them, and they do. And so this is, of course, something that Israel cannot handle. It's something the Egyptian government has to handle, but it is a human tragedy that is taking place today in the Sinai with these people trying to, smuggle themselves into Israel. The wall has prevented any more smuggling.
And one more question, if I may. At the time that the fence was completed with Egypt, Prime Minister Netanyahu also announced that a program would be begun to remove the illegal immigrants who had arrived before the fence was completed. How is that progressing?
Well, what is happening is a lot of these people are being offered, I believe, $500 cash and a free trip back. Because these people are not Jewish. Israel is a Jewish state. If we don't, have them go back to where they came from, eventually these people get married, they have children, and then we have basically a Muslim hostile population within Israel of people that are they're not Arab, they're not Jewish, they're just African. I have nothing against Africans. We have Ethiopians, but they're Jewish, so we let them in.
Thank you for the call here. Folks, another site here to quickly check out, thereligionofpeace.com. And they're talking here on the website, the Quran contains at least 109 verses that call Muslims to war with non-believers for the sake of Islamic rule. Some are quite graphic, with commands to chop off heads and fingers and kill infidels wherever they may be hiding. Muslims who do not join the fight are called hypocrites and warn that Allah will send them to hell if they do not join the slaughter. So much more there. But Avi Lipkin has been with us here today on Crosstalk. His website, vicmord.com, vicmord.com. And Avi, you have about 20 seconds here to leave a closing thought with the listeners.
One little thing we didn't talk about was the Boston bombings. The older brother who got killed of these Chechens, the Russians warned the United States. The older brother, it's very hard to prove it now, 3 Jewish guys who used to work out with him and hang out with him were found beheaded. Now, I've been in Houston. I heard a little story that didn't make the national news, but a Jewish boy who befriended a Saudi boy got his head chopped off by the Saudi boy. The Saudi boy was promptly deported to Saudi Arabia, and that's the end of the story. These things happen all over the United States. You have in New Jersey a Coptic family that was being...
Avi Lipkin, thank you so much. Our guest today talking to us live from Israel, the website vicmord.com. Thanks for joining us.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.